Imagine this. You walk into a restaurant to enjoy your evening, but things don't go as you expected. A scene unfolds before your eyes that is breathtaking and truly frightening. The waiter, the one we are used to seeing as polite and friendly, suddenly displays horrifying cruelty. He refuses to serve a black man and then, crossing all boundaries, uses force, pushing him out of the restaurant in front of amazed customers. But the most interesting thing begins later. The waiter did not even suspect that the man was a close friend of the restaurant owner. Friends, this is one of those stories that you don't want to look away from until the very end. While you're watching, write in the comments what your name is and where you're watching this video from. We really want to get to know each and every one of you. We are truly grateful that you are with us because your support helps our channel grow and reach new heights. You are the real strength of our community, and thanks to you, we continue to tell stories like this. Each and every one of you is incredibly important to us, and each of your comments and likes make our channel stronger. Enjoy the show. The protagonist, a tall man with a confident posture, walks into a cozy restaurant, hoping to spend a quiet evening. He barely manages to take a couple of steps when his gaze crosses with the waiter standing at the counter. Instead of the usual cordiality and professional interest that one usually sees on the faces of restaurant employees, he encounters something completely different: an icy, unfriendly stare full of contempt. The waiter evaluates him from head to toe, as if he sees something unpleasant that spoils the atmosphere of the restaurant. The man catches this judgmental look and feels uncomfortable, although he doesn't yet understand what could have caused this attitude. But when the waiter wrinkles his nose and, raising his chin in displeasure, snorts slightly, it becomes obvious that this is not just a casual misunderstanding. A tinge of dislike, noticeable in the waiter's behavior, says it unequivocally. The waiter does not hide his disdain or his unwillingness to serve this customer. His face remains stony, and even in the fleeting movement as he moves away, there is a hidden gesture, as if he has encountered something unpleasant and does not want to approach. The main character's name is Michael. He tries to ignore the unpleasant first impression and confidently heads to a free table by the window, hoping that he will still be able to spend a quiet evening here. Michael sits down, scrutinizes the menu, and occasionally glances at the waiter, a young man named Tom. He looked to be about 25, with a short cropped blonde head and cold, piercing eyes, which Michael now noticed were not just indifferent, but deliberately contemptuous. It was as if Tom was passing Michael's table on purpose. Busy with various small tasks, he was adjusting vases of flowers, wiping tables with endless enthusiasm, filling glasses with water for other customers. For a second their gazes crossed, and Michael caught not only the coldness but also a slight chuckle, as if Tom found his presence funny and even a little unpleasant. The people sitting at the neighboring tables, a couple and a small group of friends, get all the attention they need from Tom, who listens carefully to their orders, jokes politely, anticipating their needs, as if trying to please everyone. But when it comes to Michael, it's as if Tom has forgotten he exists. Michael waits patiently, giving the waiter a chance to approach, but he sees Tom turn away after barely a glance at him and turn to another group of customers, a family with children, whom he greets with a warm and friendly greeting. Michael feels irritation building in him, but decides to wait a little longer, believing this is all a mistake. After a few minutes of waiting, Michael's patience is wearing thin. He raises his hand to get the waiter's attention, trying to remain calm. Tom, apparently noticing this movement, walks slowly to the table, arms crossed over his chest, with an expression of disgust that he no longer hides. He looks at Michael as if he has done something unacceptable by his near presence in the restaurant. "What do you want?" Tom said coldly, raising his eyebrows slightly and looking down at Michael as if he were some annoying passerby the waiter was ready to chase away at any moment. Michael takes a deep breath and politely replies, "I'd like to place an order. Can I have a menu?" Tom smirks, a dismissive grin appearing on his face. "Menu," he repeated, deliberately slow, as if Michael didn't understand the simplest of words. "I don't think we have anything here suitable for you." Michael frowns, trying to understand what the waiter means. His voice was offensive, and Michael felt an unpleasant sense of humiliation rise. But before he can respond, Tom leans a little closer and speaks quieter, but in a way that makes his words sound as offensive as possible. "Look, this is a place for certain people. You must have the wrong door, buddy. We have a family atmosphere here. You know, we're not used to visitors like this." The words hit Michael's ego like a slap in the face. He realizes that Tom is referring to his skin color, and this open contempt and rudeness make him freeze with surprise and indignation. But Tom apparently intends to finish him off even worse. "Maybe you'd better find someplace easier," Tom continued, raising his eyes to the ceiling and grinning again. "You know, the kind of place that serves fried chicken or something. It's not for everyone." Michael, shocked, is speechless for a moment. He had never experienced such open and shameless rudeness before. Tom pulls back, and there is a glint of satisfaction in his eyes, clearly enjoying the humiliation Michael is experiencing. Michael is about to reply, but stops, making an effort not to get into a burst of anger. He equalizes his breathing and tries to speak calmly again. "I just want to place an order. All I need is a menu and a little time to make up my mind." Tom interrupts him abruptly, raising his palm with an icy grin as if to indicate him to shut up. "Look," he says with barely contained irritation, "let's not make this difficult. I'm not going to waste my time on people like you." Tom emphasizes this "people like you" as if it weren't even up for discussion, as if it were an unalterable truth. Michael feels a wave of humiliation wash over him. His hands tense, but he holds back, continuing to maintain his dignity despite the open insult. "I'll pay like everyone else," he tries to explain, hoping that common sense will prevail after all. But Tom only brushes aside his words with a mocking look. "It has nothing to do with money," he replies dismissively. "It's just that our restaurant favors a defined clientele, and I, you know, decide who fits in and who doesn't." With every word, Tom seems to ignite a fire of humiliation and shame in Michael's chest, making his presence in the restaurant unbearable. The waiter shows his power, enjoying every second of this insulting rejection, as if he wants to make Michael feel that it doesn't belong in this place. Michael notices that their conversation is beginning to attract the attention of other customers. Several people sitting at neighboring tables furtively glance at him and Tom, and some of them are already watching the unfolding scene wearily. However, this only seems to encourage Tom, making him enjoy his position and the humiliation he brings to Michael even more. With feigned politeness and a faintly loud voice, Tom leans a little closer, as if the interlocutor in front of him is poorly understood, and pronounces so that everyone around him can hear. "I've already told you, we don't cater to everyone here. If you didn't get it the first time, maybe you should find a simpler place where they're used to this kind of guest." These words elicit chuckles from the neighboring tables, and Michael feels the laughter of these people crashing into him, adding to his bitterness and humiliation. One of the diners, an older man, looks away, muttering something under his breath and shaking his head as if approving of Tom's actions. The other woman sitting at the table with him watches this situation carefully, with an interest that reads indifference and even a slight condemnation. Tom, meanwhile, raises his palm and with a sarcastic expression, as if to admonish Michael, speaks loudly and with feigned courtesy. "Look, this is not a takeout place. We're on a certain level, and frankly, you don't belong here. We don't want to make our circle uncomfortable." He says the last words particularly loudly, glancing in the direction of those sitting at the next table, as if asking for support from the audience. A couple, noticing this glance, nods approvingly. One of them, a young man with frowning eyebrows, casts a disdainful glance at Michael, as if approving the waiter's actions. Michael felt a lump of humiliation rise to his throat. It seemed to him that all eyes were on him, and every one of them was soaked in judgment, in tacit agreement with Tom. Michael, barely able to cope with his inner shock and humiliation, takes a deep breath and decides not to remain silent. When he gathers his strength, he stares calmly but firmly into Tom's eyes, trying to maintain his dignity despite the cruelty of the situation. "I have as much right to be here as anyone else," he says with restraint, but there's an undercurrent of steel in his voice. "You, as an employee, have a duty of respect to all guests, no exceptions." Tom, instead of at least trying to soften his stance, swells even more with self-importance, as if enjoying the pleasure of being able to devalue and humiliate another person so easily. He looks at Michael with deliberate contempt and crosses his arms, grinning even wider, enjoying the attention. Obliged to comply, Tom interjected sarcastically, his voice a little louder than it needed to be, and the words penetrated the atmosphere like sharp arrows, gathering the eyes of the visitors. Who the hell are you to dictate to me what I have to do? You're nobody here and your name is nothing. You think I'm gonna waste my time on someone who doesn't fit in here at all? Michael can't feel his patience wearing thin, but he knows he can't give in to the provocation. He tries to keep his composure, not letting his anger get the best of him. If I'm here, then I deserve the same respect as the others, he replies, his voice trembling slightly from the strain, but he still maintains a firm tone. But Tom doesn't let him finish. At that moment, the waiter steps forward sharply and, leaning slightly over Michael, hisses, "You think anyone here is going to mess with you?" He glances around the room again, as if to confirm, "I'll tell you straight up, no one was expecting you here. You have no idea how comical you look, demanding respect. Just look at you, and look at them." He gestured at the other guests, who were already starting to murmur and chuckle. "Do you really believe that anyone here would find you worthy of attention?" These words hurt Michael to the core, but he makes a last effort not to lower his head under the weight of humiliation. He knows he can't let this man completely rob him of his self-control. But Tom, sensing his superiority, as with a smirk, "You better go before I call security and have you thrown out of here." Michael feels the situation getting out of control, but tries to remain calm despite Tom's humiliation and aggression. However, the waiter, apparently deciding that his words are no longer enough, takes a sharp step forward and roughly grabs Michael's arm. There is not an ounce of restraint or professionalism in his movement, only fury and contempt. "I told you you don't belong here," Tom hissed, squeezing Michael's hand so hard that he winced in pain. "Didn't you get it the first time?" A strong, strained silence hangs in the air. The rest of the visitors freeze, some looking away stunned, pretending not to notice what's happening. But many, on the contrary, are watching Tom's every move intently, not trying to hide their interest. Some are clearly confused, but no one makes a move to intervene. It's as if they don't dare to challenge the waiter, who behaves like a master of the situation, as if he knows that no one will interface with him. Michael, feeling his wrist clench tighter, tried to pull free, but Tom, sensing his superiority, only pressed him harder against him, looming over him in a threatening silhouette. "You think you can sit here and demand something?" he says, his voice full of contempt, his voice sounding like it would send shivers down the spine of those around him. "You know, I'm even doing you a favor by throwing you out of here. Consider it a polite invitation to leave." And with those words, Tom shoved Michael away from the table and threw him toward the exit. Michael, losing his balance, barely manages to put his hands out in order not to fall to the floor. This movement is the last humiliation, the last straw, after which he realizes that all the boundaries of what is acceptable have long since been erased. Michael hears a quiet gasp of horror escape from one of the customers, but no one gets up to help or stop the waiter. Tom, feeling his total impunity, roughly grabs Michael's shoulder, squeezing it so hard that his fingers dig into his skin, and begins dragging him toward the exit. There is no longer a shadow of the restraint or professionalism in his eyes that is expected of any restaurant worker. His face reads only outright dislike and a strange satisfaction at being able to humiliate another person so openly. It was as if Tom was deliberately trying to make it as painful and humiliating as possible, as if his whole point was to make Michael feel insignificant. "I told you, you don't belong here," he said loudly, almost shouting for everyone to hear. His voice was mocking, and every word was a new slap in the face from Michael. "You think your precious personality can just sit here and demand service? Wrong door." Dragging him forcefully towards the door, Tom almost pushes Michael to every table, deliberately making him hit chairs and furniture, making his way to the exit a real humiliating march. The waiter's every move is fueled with overt racism and hatred, which he no longer hides. Tom feels like he is the master of the situation and furiously takes out his contempt as if he is doing the right thing by getting rid of an undesirable guest. When they reach the front door, Tom shoves Michael out, leaving him no chance to keep his balance. The door swings open with a bang, and Michael finds himself outside in the cold rain. The sudden jolt almost causes him to fall, but he manages to keep his footing by grabbing the wall at the entrance. His heart is pounding with rage and shame, and he is stunned at how this has all unfolded in just a few minutes. The restaurant door slammed shut behind him, cutting him off from the light and warmth inside. Tom didn't even take one last look at him. Michael was worthless to him, just a nuisance that he was happy to throw out the door. As the door slammed shut behind Michael, there is an oppressive silence inside the restaurant. A few customers seated near the exit look around in shock, wondering how they could have witnessed such cruelty and outright humiliation. Their faces express shock, and their gazes reveal that they have just witnessed something that simply does not feed into their usual idea of normalcy. One of the men sitting at the table with his family shakes his head, barely concealing his indignation. He whispers something indignant to his wife, lowering his voice, but his children, seeing their parents' anxiety, remain tensely silent, sensing something inexplicably unpleasant. Next to them sits an elderly couple, the woman covering her mouth with her hand, still digesting what has happened. Her eyes are full of sympathy and bewilderment, but she remains silent, as if afraid that any word might provoke a response from Tom. Meanwhile, a quiet conversation begins at a neighboring table. A young couple, a girl and a guy, who have just watched the scene with amazement, begin to discuss what has happened. The girl looks at the guy and, lowering her voice, is perplexed. "Did you see the way he treated him? It was awful. I don't even know how to react to it." The guy, still stunned, clutches his glass and replies in a subdued voice, "It's just wrong, but we don't know anything. Maybe they had their reasons." He falls silent, unable to finish his sentence. He himself cannot find any justification for what has just happened, but he tries to stay out of the conflict, as if afraid that interference might affect his own peace and comfort. Most of the other visitors prefer to look away, pretending they hadn't noticed anything. Some of them are just uncomfortable. They don't want to get involved in the conflict. They don't want it to affect them in any way. They glance around furtively, trying to catch the waiter's eye and see if such behavior is normal here, but no one dares to express their opinion out loud. This mixture of fear, indignation, and reluctance to interface hangs in the air, turning the atmosphere of the restaurant into a tense wait. Everyone realizes that something unacceptable has just happened, but no one knows how to react. Tom, noticing these looks, acts as if nothing special has happened. He keeps his chin high, as if to confirm that he has done the right thing, and returns to his duties, politely serving the customers as if nothing had happened. A few minutes after the incident, the door of the restaurant opens again and the owner, a middle-aged man named Richard, enters, tall and confident. He is used to his restaurant being a place of warmth and hospitality, but as soon as he crosses the threshold, Richard notices something strange, usually lively and relaxed atmosphere, as if frowning. The air seems to be saturated with tension. The visitors are unnaturally quiet, and some of them are furtively glancing at each other and whispering, clearly indicating some recent incident. Richard slowly looks around the room, and his professional eye immediately catches the unusual behavior of the staff. The waiters are trying to avoid each other's and the guests' gazes, as if afraid to ask a question or draw attention to themselves. There is a glimmer of anxiety in the eyes of some of them, and they behave warily, as if waiting for some kind of continuation or explanation. As he approaches the counter, Richard notices Tom, who seems to be calmly going about his duties, but his gaze is cold and hard, and his hands are trembling slightly with tension. Richard notices this and frowns. He knows his staff and is used to trusting them, but now Tom's behavior makes him suspicious. Tom, noticing Richard's presence, tenses, but carefully avoids his master's gaze, immersing himself in his work with ostentatious diligence. Realizing that something is clearly wrong, Richard decides to find out what is wrong. The attention of the visitors, the evasive glances, and the obvious awkwardness make him feel uncomfortable. It becomes clear to him that what happened was something serious, something that no one wants to discuss, but which is literally in the air. Suddenly, one of the regulars, a woman named Mary, notices Richard and beckons him over with a concerned expression on her face. "Richard," she said in a whisper, nodding toward the door, "something's happened here. One of your employees," she cast a wary glance at Tom, "kicked a man out with such rudeness that I could hardly believe my eyes." Richard turns sharply toward Tom, a realization flashing in his gaze that something unacceptable has happened. Tom, standing at the counter and pretending to be busy with his duties, suddenly notices Richard approaching him with a grim expression on his face. Under the gaze of the owner of the establishment, Tom begins to feel uncomfortable. He realizes that his actions may have been the cause of all this tension. He tries to hide his uneasiness behind an indifferent mask, but the feeling of unease keeps him on his toes. Richard approaches Tom, and the latter, trying to keep his composure, takes a step back. At that moment, the master, looking straight into his eyes, asks him discreetly but firmly, "Tom, what happened here? My client claims that you kicked someone out, and apparently not in the most polite way. Is that true?" Tom, swallowing nervously, tries to justify himself, trying not to give away the fear that is already building in his chest. He understands that his job and reputation depend on this conversation, but he still hopes to justify his behavior. "Well, that man, he was inappropriate for our restaurant," Tom mumbles, trying to find the words to explain what he did. "I thought it was right not to let him stay here." At these words, Richard's face becomes stern, and displeasure flares in his eyes. He leans closer to Tom, his voice cold and hard. "Are you talking about Michael?" Richard asks, pausing to emphasize each word. "Michael, who is a close friend of mine." The words stun Tom like a thunderclap. Shock flashes in his eyes, and he stands frozen in place, realizing the full extent of his mistake. He never would have imagined that the man he had just pushed out into the street with outright contempt would turn out to be a close friend of his boss. Panic overwhelms him, and he begins to realize that his act will not be without consequences. Richard, shocked to the core that his friend Michael has been humiliated and assaulted in his restaurant, cannot hold back his growing rage. His gaze becomes cold and hard, and his voice steely and unwavering. He looks at Tom, who is shrinking more and more under his gaze, realizing that the conversation is taking a serious turn. "Do you realize what you've done?" Richard asked, looking straight into the waiter's eyes, which were filled with confusion and fear. "Michael is my friend. I trust him like I trust myself. And you, Tom, kicked him out, insulted and humiliated him in front of everyone. And you think that's acceptable in my restaurant?" Tom tries to say something, but the words stick in his throat. He sees that no excuses can help him. Panic begins to take over, and he realizes that his actions will not be without consequences. "Richard, I didn't know he was your friend," Tom whispered, trying to keep his dignity, but his voice trembled. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I'm sorry. It was a misunderstanding." Richard only clenches his jaw harder when he hears those words. His anger goes beyond words, and he barely restrains himself from raising his voice. "Misunderstanding," he interjects, his tone icy with contempt. "You think you can humiliate people just because they don't fit your concept of a worthy client? You didn't even give him a chance. Is that a misunderstanding or an outright abuse of power? And how long have you been treating our guests like this?" Richard realizes that he needs to take action to not only punish Tom, but also to restore the restaurant's reputation. He needs to decide what to do about this humiliating behavior, and he has no intention of backing down. He begins to think through the options: termination, disciplinary action, perhaps even a public apology to Michael all pop into his head. "You have two choices, Tom," Richard says at last, sternly and coldly, looking the waiter straight in the eye. "Either you leave right now and never work in the service industry again, or you stay, but on one condition." Tom, realizing that he could lose his job instantly, asks in a trembling voice, "What condition?" "You're going to apologize to Michael," Richard says, his voice getting firmer. "Right here, in front of everyone, and on top of that, you're going to have to take a course in cultural and ethical customer service. If you stay, any further behavior will result in immediate dismissal." Tom realizes it's humiliating, but he has no choice. Tom, realizing that his actions have put him in a most humiliating position, can barely cope with the excitement of standing in front of Richard, who no longer hides his contempt. He takes a deep breath, trying to find the words, but his voice trembles, and every word he says sounds uncertain and pathetic. "Richard, I realize how it looks. I didn't make a mistake," Tom muttered, trying to avoid his master's gaze. "But, honestly, I had no malicious intent. I thought I was just protecting the reputation of the restaurant." Richard looks at him coldly, and there is not a shadow of compassion in his gaze. These excuses only add to his frustration. "You were protecting a reputation," he says quietly, but his voice rings with indignation. "Protecting a reputation from who?" "My friend, from a man who came here like any other customer, entitled to respect and decent treatment." Tom feels his throat tighten. He realizes that every word he says only exacerbates the situation, but it's impossible to stop. All he can do is try to keep some dignity. "Richard," he tries to explain, "I really didn't know it was your friend. If I had known, I just didn't think it was that important." Richard doesn't let him finish, holding back a burst of anger. "Have you ever thought that it's important to show basic respect to any person who crosses the threshold of my restaurant?" His voice is hard and ruthless. "You think it's because he's my friend? Everyone deserves respect, and it's your responsibility to give it, regardless of your prejudices and personal opinions." Tom finally breaks down under this pressure and, realizing he can't justify himself, proceeds to try to beg for forgiveness. In a low, dejected voice, he says, "Please forgive me, Richard. I realize this is unforgivable. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it right. I'll talk to Michael. I'll apologize. I'll do whatever it takes." But Richard doesn't even listen to him, turning away as if Tom's words don't matter anymore. To him, these pleas and pathetic excuses sound empty and meaningless. Every insult Tom makes now turns against him, making him feel his own worthlessness. Richard, seeing no point in Tom's excuses and pleas, raises his hand to stop him before he can utter another word. His anger is replaced by cold determination, and he takes a step back to announce loudly and clearly the decision that will change Tom's life forever. "Tom," Richard said, his voice loud and firm, so that everyone in the room could hear his words, "from now on, you are no longer working in this restaurant. I will not tolerate any disrespect here, much less racism. Your cruelty and arrogance have undermined the trust I have placed in you as an employee." Richard's words are like a deafening blow to Tom. He realizes that the only source of his steady income, his place in the respected restaurant where he has built his career, is gone in an instant. The shock of realizing his imminent dismissal leaves him frozen in place. He hardly realizes that all his attempts to justify himself, all his confidence and arrogance have backfired on him. Now he will not only lose his job, but will suffer deeper consequences that will be remembered forever by all who witnessed the scene. The restaurant patrons, who had just been stunned by Tom's violent behavior, now watch his humiliation with expressions of satisfaction and even relief. Their judgmental glances and whispers further add to his sense of shame. Some of the customers nod approvingly, while others take pictures on their phones to share this moment, which will now become part of his reputation. Tom realizes that this dismissal will be the final blow to his career. Word spreads quickly, and soon everywhere will know about his racist act and how he was kicked out of the restaurant. Having lost his job, he knows it won't be easy to find a new place. His reputation is ruined, and he'll have to explain his dismissal at every new establishment he turns to. He sees his future in the dull stares and judgmental faces of customers and co-workers as arrogance and intolerance will forever be a stigma he has placed on himself. Slumped and humiliated, Tom slowly takes off his apron and walks out of the restaurant without saying a word. There is a heavy silence in the air, but everyone realizes that what happened was necessary. Richard, for his part, looks after him, knowing that his decision will send an important message to everyone. There is no room for hatred and prejudice in his restaurant. Tom walks out of the restaurant and the door closes silently behind him, as if drawing a line under his career and arrogance. He stops on the street, stunned and devastated, realizing that every look directed at him will now be full of condemnation. Tom realizes for the first time the weight of his actions. His dismissal is not just a job loss, but a blow to everything he thought he was, his position, the respect and power he had so avidly used against others. There is an oppressive but calm silence inside the restaurant. Richard returns to his duties, casting one last glance at his guests, as if promising that such a thing will not happen again within his walls. The patrons, feeling that justice has been done, gradually return to their conversations, albeit with a slight tang of having witnessed this painful scene. When the door opens again sometime later and Michael enters the room, he has a look of surprise on his face. He decides to return, having learned from Richard that the restaurant is now safe and open to everyone. Seeing him, Richard greets his friend with a warm smile and gestures him to a table. Michael realizes that he will no longer have to face neglect and hatred in this place. All resentments and pain gradually dissolve, leaving room for a new beginning. The restaurant is once again filled with laughter, lively conversations, and the warmth that, for everyone without exception, must have been its true atmosphere. This evening will remain a reminder to all present. True dignity is found in respect for everyone, and prejudice and cruelty like Tom's will always find an end. Friends, this story is a reminder of how important respect and equality are for all of us. Let us know in the comments what you think about this case. Have you or someone close to you experienced racism? How would you react if you were Michael? We are very interested in your opinion. Each and every one of you is incredibly important to us, and we sincerely appreciate your support and participation. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe and like it. It helps us share important stories with an even larger audience. Thank you for being with us and have a great day.